Your education destroyed your brain, not metaphorically, not partially, literally destroyed the thinking abilities you were born with. And a physicist named Richard Feynman documented exactly how it happened. Brazil, 1952. A Cornell professor walks into a classroom in Rio de Janeiro. The students can recite quantum mechanics formulas perfectly. They ace every test, every single one of them passes with high marks. Then Feynman asks one question: if light reflects off water, in what direction is it polarized? Silence. Not one student knows. They've memorized everything and understood nothing. These weren't failing students. They were succeeding exactly as the system measured success. They could recite definitions word perfect. They could solve textbook problems. They could pass every examination the university administered, and they couldn't apply a single concept to the real world. This wasn't a Brazil problem. This wasn't poor teaching. This was successful education. And it's exactly what happened to you. You spent 12 years in school, 4 more in college, maybe additional years in graduate programs, thousands of hours, tens of thousands of dollars. And here's what you can't do: explain the basics of your own field to a curious 12-year-old without retreating into jargon. Apply what you studied to actual problems without Googling the answer. Generate original insight instead of reciting what authorities told you. This isn't your fault. Your brain worked perfectly before they got to it. The mechanism that destroyed your thinking isn't mysterious. It's documented. And once you see it, you'll understand why you struggle and why it was never your intelligence. It was their method, the lie you were sold. Education teaches you how to think. The truth Feynman exposed: education trains you to stop thinking and start performing. There's a difference. Before school, children ask why constantly. They explore, they test, they question authority naturally. A 5-year-old sees a claim and immediately asks for evidence. Shows them a magic trick and they demand to know how it works. Tell them something is true because an adult said so, and they remain skeptical. Then education begins. By university, those same humans sit silently in lecture halls. They memorize what authorities tell them. They never question if it connects to reality. They optimize for grades, not understanding. They've learned the most important lesson education teaches: compliance masquerading as intelligence. This isn't maturity. This is brain damage, and it's intentional. Feynman saw this clearly because he escaped it. While his peers admit memorized formulas from textbooks, Feynman re-derived everything from scratch and notebooks. While his colleagues accepted expert opinions without verification, Feynman tested personally, even if it meant embarrassing powerful people. While other Nobel laureates spoke in impenetrable jargon that impressed administrators, Feynman could explain quantum mechanics to freshman students who actually understood it afterward. The difference wasn't intelligence. His IQ tested at 125, high, but unremarkable for a physicist. Definitely unremarkable for a Nobel Prize winner. The difference was that his brain hadn't been destroyed by the same system that destroyed yours. This wasn't about physics. Physics was just where the destruction became visible. The same mechanism that made Brazilian students memorize without understanding is the mechanism that made you spend 4 years in college without gaining the ability to think independently. The same system that made textbook committees approve blank books is the system that convinced you credentials equal competence. And Feynman didn't just notice this. He documented 3 specific mechanisms, each one verifiable, each one still operating in every classroom and university and corporate training program today. Each one actively destroying the natural thinking abilities humans are born with. This to understand what they destroyed and how to rebuild it. We need to see what Feynman actually discovered when he tried to teach physics to students the system had already processed. 1951, the Brazilian Center for Physical Research invites Feynman to teach for 1 year. They're desperate to build a scientific culture. They have universities, they have textbooks. They have credentialed professors, they have laboratories. They have everything except the one thing that matters: students who understand anything. Feynman arrives in Rio and walks into his first class. The students look eager. They have notebooks ready. They've done the assigned reading. By every measure schools use, they're prepared. He starts simple. Can someone explain polarized light? A student raises his hand immediately and recites from memory. Light consists of electric and magnetic fields that vibrate perpendicular to the direction of propagation. And in polarized light, These vibrations are confined to a single plane, perfect, word for word from the textbook. So Feynman asks the obvious follow-up. Good. Now when light reflects off water, in what plane is it polarized? The student stares, says nothing. Feynman tries a different student. Can you give me one example of polarized light you've observed in the real world? Blank face. He tries simpler. This formula you just recited, what does it predict you'll actually see if you look at reflected light through a polarizing filter? Silence across the entire classroom. These weren't stupid students. They'd passed rigorous entrance examinations to get into this university. They could derive complex equations on demand. They could solve every problem in the textbook. They were succeeding by every metric the education system measured, and they understood absolutely nothing. Not one student could connect the words they had memorized to actual phenomena they could observe. Not one could predict what would happen in a simple real-world scenario. Not one could explain why the formula mattered or what it described. They'd learned to manipulate symbols perfectly. They just didn't know what those symbols represented. Feynman spent the year trying different approaches. Nothing worked. At the end, he gave a speech to the faculty that they didn't appreciate, as he later wrote in. Surely you're joking, Mr. Feynman. They could pass all the examinations, but they couldn't apply anything they learned. They didn't know how to see physics in the real world. But here's what Feynman realized that the faculty couldn't accept. This wasn't a Brazil problem. He'd seen exactly the same pattern at MIT, at Princeton, at Cornell. American students had the same disease. They could recite. They couldn't apply. They could perform on tests. They couldn't think about reality. Brazil just made it visible because the system was newer, cruder, more obvious. But the mechanism was identical and it's still operating today. This is the first way education destroyed your brain. Reality disconnection. Your teachers did this to you systematically. Every time they rewarded you for reciting the correct answer without requiring you to demonstrate understanding, they trained you to sever knowledge from reality. And every time they tested memorization instead of application, they destroyed your ability to connect concepts to actual phenomena. Every time you got an A for writing what the textbook said instead of for predicting what would happen in the real world, they reinforced the pattern. Symbols matter, reality doesn't. This explains everything you couldn't understand about yourself after graduation. Why? You can read a business book and remember nothing a week later. You memorize the symbols, the vocabulary, the frameworks, the chapter summaries. You never connected them to your actual work. The symbols entered your brain. They never touched reality, so they evaporated. Why? You can take a certification course and still feel incompetent. You passed the test by recognizing the right symbols. That you never demonstrated you could apply the concept to a real problem. The certification proves you can memorize. It proves nothing about understanding why you have a degree but can't explain your field to someone outside it. You learned the professional jargon, the symbols insiders use to identify each other. You never learned to connect those symbols to phenomena anyone can observe. You can perform the ritual. You can't explain what it means. The repair is simple but uncomfortable. Feynman's method. After reading anything, close the book. Describe the concept in your own words without using the author's jargon. Then predict one specific real-world outcome. What will happen if you apply this? What can you observe? What can you test? If you can't do this, you memorize symbols. You didn't understand and the fact that you passed the test anyway proves the test measured the wrong thing. Your expensive education never taught you this because teaching it would expose how little the education itself provided. The system optimized for the appearance of knowledge. Feynman demanded actual understanding. These produce completely different results. But why did your teachers never admit this? Because they couldn't. They were products of the same system. And Feynman proved this in 1960 for when California asked him to help select textbooks. The state needed new science textbooks for millions of students. High stakes. They formed a committee of credentialed experts. Publishers submitted their best work, standard process that every state uses. Feynman volunteered because he was curious how the system actually made these decisions. The committee meets, publishers present their textbooks, beautiful covers, glossy pages, impressive credentials listed for every author. The committee begins reviewing them, except they're not actually reviewing them. Feynman notices the other committee members aren't reading the books. They're reading the marketing materials. They're checking which university professors endorsed each textbook. They're evaluating publisher reputation. They're comparing credentials. They're discussing everything except the actual content on the actual pages. Feynman objects. He's told we can't read every book thoroughly. There isn't time. We have to trust the expert recommendations. He keeps reading anyway, book after book, actually checking if the content makes sense, if the explanations work, if the problems teach thinking, or just test memorization. Then one publisher submits a mathematics textbook beautifully bound. Prestigious endorsements from 3 university professors. Multiple expert signatures vouching for its quality, published by a well-known academic press. The committee begins the process of voting to approve it for millions of California students. Feynman raises his hand. I object to this book. The committee asks why. Because every page is blank except the title page. This book is completely empty. Confusion. They check their copies. He's right. The entire textbook, every page is blank. The publisher had sent the submission early to meet the deadline, planning to add the actual content later. But the endorsement letters were real. The expert signatures were authentic. The publisher credentials were legitimate. Oh, the committee had almost approved a literally empty textbook because the authorities vouched for it. Not one member except Feynman had actually opened the book to verify the content existed. As Feynman wrote in, "Surely you're joking, Mr. Feynman. The whole system was designed to avoid independent judgment, verify nothing, trust authority. It was intellectual fraud masquerading as education. This is the second way education destroyed your brain: verification, abdication. The system didn't just fail to teach you to verify claims independently. It actively trained you not to. It punished verification and rewarded obedience. Every time a teacher told you, Harvard research shows, without teaching you to examine the methodology yourself. They trained you to worship credentials instead of evidence. And every time they penalized you for questioning the textbook, they trained you that verification is disrespectful. Every time they rewarded you for citing authorities instead of testing claims, they destroyed your ability to think independently. By graduation, you'd learn perfectly, check the credentials, trust the experts, verify nothing. This wasn't laziness. This was systematic training. And it explains your current limitations, why you believe advice from business gurus without testing if it actually works for you. You were trained to trust credentials over results. The guru has a best-selling book and a large following. That's the credential check. Whether the advice produces results when you apply it, you never learn to verify that. Why you accept study conclusions because they're from prestigious universities without examining if the methodology was sound. You were trained that verification is the job of other experts, not you. The university is ranked highly. The journal is peer-reviewed. Credential check complete. Whether the study actually proves what it claims. You were trained not to ask why you say experts say in arguments instead of I tested and found. You were trained that citing authority wins debates. Understanding and verifying for yourself, that was never rewarded. In fact, it was often punished as questioning the teacher. The repair is uncomfortable because it requires admitting how much you currently accept without verification. Feynman's method. When someone cites authority, ask, what's the actual evidence? When an expert makes a claim, or ask, can I verify this myself? When a credential impresses you, ask, what can this person actually demonstrate? Your education taught you this was disrespectful. Feynman proved it was the only path to genuine understanding. At Los Alamos, he famously picked locks and cracked safes, not from mischief, but to prove that security measures authorities claimed were perfect, had obvious flaws anyone could exploit. When physicists claimed certain calculations were impossible, he did them using different methods. When textbooks presented settled science, he checked if it actually predicted observations accurately. This wasn't arrogance. This was basic intellectual hygiene, the kind 5-year-olds practice naturally before education trains it out of them. But the destruction goes deeper era because even students who somehow maintained reality connection and verification habits face the third mechanism, the one that killed original thinking entirely. MIT 1939 Richard Feynman arrives as an undergraduate. Brilliant kid from Queens, talented at mathematics. His classmates are equally talented. Many have higher IQs. Several will go on to successful academic careers. But within 5 years, Feynman will be solving problems at Los Alamos that physicists decades older can't touch. The difference wasn't intelligence or talent or work ethic. The difference was what he did with his time when nobody was watching. While his classmates optimized for grades, studying exactly what professors wanted, memorizing exactly what tests required, focusing entirely on getting perfect marks, Feynman kept a notebook. Not for class notes, for problems nobody assigned, for questions that had no right answers in the back of the textbook. For physics, he was genuinely curious about, but that wouldn't appear on any exam. He re-derived formulas from scratch to see if the textbook's method was actually the best method or just the standard method. He invented different notations to see if they revealed patterns the conventional notation hid. He worked problems the wrong way, the inefficient way to understand why the textbook's way worked. His professors thought this was stupid. Why derive a formula yourself when the textbook already provides it? Why explore alternative methods when the exam tests the standard method? Why waste time on curiosity when grades reward efficiency? It has but Feynman's inefficiency built something schools can't measure and don't value. Understanding that generates new knowledge instead of just reciting old knowledge. By the time he reached Los Alamos at age 24, Feynman could approach problems that senior physicists couldn't solve, not because he knew more formulas. Because while they knew the right answers to known problems, he understood the principles well enough to generate approaches to unknown problems. As he later explained in Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman, discussing his problem-solving approach. I had a different box of tools. Everyone else learned the standard tools and used them efficiently. I built my own tools from scratch. That meant when a problem didn't fit the standard tools, I could make new ones. They couldn't. Your teachers destroyed this ability in you. This is the third mechanism, curiosity replacement. Education systematically replaced your natural exploratory curiosity with goal-directed compliance. The motivation shift seems small. The cognitive damage is catastrophic. Every time they rewarded you for finding the right answer quickly instead of exploring the problem deeply, they trained you to optimize for performance instead of understanding. Every time they penalized inefficient methods, even when those methods built deeper comprehension, they trained you that the goal is the grade, not the knowledge. Every time they made you feel stupid for being curious about something that wasn't on the test, they trained you to kill your natural curiosity and replace it with strategic compliance. That children explore because they're curious. Students study because they need the grade. The shift seems natural. It's actually devastating. Curiosity generates understanding because it follows the natural logic of the subject. You explore what genuinely interests you, which means you pay attention, make connections, remember details. Compliance generates performance because it follows the artificial logic of the test. You study what you're told, which means you're optimizing for someone else's measure of success, not your own understanding. These develop completely different mental capabilities. Curiosity asks, what happens if I tried this differently? Compliance asks, what does the teacher want? Curiosity builds flexible understanding that transfers to new problems. Compliance builds rigid performance that fails the moment the test format changes. Curiosity creates Nobel Prize winners who can generate new knowledge. Compliance creates credentialed professionals who can only apply existing knowledge. And schools are very, very good at killing curiosity and training compliance. They've had practice. This explains why you struggle now in ways you couldn't articulate. Every time you start learning something new and immediately ask, what's the fastest way to master this? You're using the broken thinking education installed. Natural curiosity doesn't optimize for speed, it explores for understanding. But you are trained to optimize for the grade, the certification, the credential, the external measure, not for genuine comprehension. Every time you judge your learning by external metrics, certifications earned, courses completed, credentials accumulated, instead of by what you can actually create or explain to others. Same mechanism, you're measuring compliance, not understanding. But compliance was all school taught you to value. Every time you abandon a topic because it won't help your career advancement, even though you're genuinely curious about it, you're letting the destroyed thinking patterns control you. You were trained that learning without a use is wasteful. That curiosity without career relevance is childish. That exploration without external reward is inefficient. The fact that this sounds normal, learning something without a use sounds weird to you, proves how thoroughly they broke your brain. 5-year-olds don't think this way. They explore because they're curious, period. No career advancement calculation, no credential accumulation, no efficiency optimization, just pure curiosity following natural interest. Then school starts, and within a decade that same human won't explore anything unless it offers external reward. The repair requires doing something that feels ridiculous because of how damaged your thinking has become. Feynman's method: pick one topic you're genuinely curious about, but that offers absolutely zero career advantage. No resume line, no certification, no professional development, just pure curiosity. Explore it with no goal except understanding. Read about it not to master it quickly, but to see what's interesting. Work problems not to get the right answer, but to see what happens when you try different approaches. Take notes not to study for a test, but to think through confusions. This rebuilds the thinking ability education destroyed. The ability to follow curiosity wherever it leads. The ability to value understanding over credentials. The ability to think instead of perform. Your expensive education never taught you this. Teaching it would require admitting that credentials don't equal competence, that grades don't measure understanding, that the entire system optimizes for the wrong outcome. Schools produce graduates who can pass tests but can't think. Feynman proved you could do the opposite. Think deeply while treating tests as trivial side effects. The system hated him for it. But he won a Nobel Prize while most of his better credentialed classmates remained unknown. When you combine all three mechanisms, reality disconnection, all verification abdication, and curiosity replacement, you get what schools proudly call educated, disconnected from reality, can recite definitions but can't apply them to observable phenomena. Worshipping authority, can cite experts but can't verify claims independently. Optimizing for compliance, can pass tests but can't generate original understanding. This is what your degree certified: not that you can think, that you can perform, not that you understand, that you can obey, not that you can create new knowledge, that you can recite old knowledge accurately. And this explains everything you couldn't understand about yourself after graduation, why you forget books immediately after reading them. You were trained to memorize for the test, not to connect to reality. Once the test ends, the symbols evaporate because they never meant anything. Why? You have credentials but lack confidence. You were trained to perform for evaluators, not to verify for yourself. You don't actually know if you understand, because you never learned how to check independently. Why? You can recognize good work but can't create it yourself. You were trained to identify what authorities approve, not to build from first principles. Recognition and creation are completely different skills. Why? You feel like an intellectual fraud despite years of education? Because you are. The education taught you to fake understanding convincingly. It never taught actual understanding, and some part of you knows this. None of that was your fault. Your brain worked perfectly before they got to it. Every single child asks why, constantly tests everything. Trust nothing without evidence. Explores because they're curious, not because someone will give them a gold star. Then education begins. 12 years of systematic training. Stop asking why. The teacher said so, that's why. Stop testing claims. Trust the textbook. Stop following curiosity. Focus on what's on the test. Replace thinking with performing. Replace understanding with obedience. Replace natural curiosity with strategic compliance. By the time you graduate, your natural thinking abilities have been systematically destroyed and replaced with performance behaviors that look like thinking to people who don't know the difference but aren't actually thinking at all. Feynman escaped this because he recognized it early. He saw his classmates becoming performers and refused to join them. While they optimized for grades, he optimized for understanding. While they memorized what authorities said, he verified personally. While they studied what would be tested, he explored what he was curious about. The system punished him for it repeatedly. Professors told him he was wasting time. Classmates told him he was being inefficient. Administrators told him he was arrogant for questioning textbooks. But in 1965, he won the Nobel Prize in Physics. And in his acceptance speech, he said something the education establishment still hasn't forgiven him for. The essence of science is to doubt, to question, to remain skeptical until you verified personally. But education rewards the opposite. It rewards certainty, acceptance, and obedience. That's not science. That's religion. You don't need their credentials. You don't need their permission. You don't need their approval. You need to rebuild what they destroyed: connection to reality. Don't accept concepts until you can predict real outcomes with them: independent verification. Don't trust authorities until you've checked evidence yourself. Curiosity-driven exploration. Don't study only what's useful, explore what interests you. These aren't advanced techniques for geniuses. These are basic cognitive functions every 5-year-old has naturally. Education trained them out of you, now you know how to rebuild them. The repair begins with understanding the damage wasn't your fault. The system was designed to produce exactly this result. Compliant performers who sound educated but can't think. Credential collectors who can recite authorities but can't verify claims. Our test takers who can identify right answers but can't generate original understanding. You were never supposed to learn how to think. You were supposed to learn how to obey while appearing intelligent. Now you know the difference. The destruction Feynman documented wasn't accidental. Schools don't fail to teach thinking, they successfully train compliance. There's a difference. One produces citizens who question. The other produces citizens who obey. Guess which one institutions prefer. And understanding that difference, really understanding it, explains everything you've struggled with. It wasn't your intelligence. It wasn't your work ethic. It wasn't your dedication or discipline or focus. It was that your brain's natural thinking abilities were systematically destroyed and replaced with performance theater, and nobody told you that they gave you a degree and sent you into the world and you couldn't understand why you still felt incompetent despite all those credentials, because the credentials proved you could perform. They proved nothing about understanding, but this mechanism, education destroying natural thinking, operates in more than just classrooms. The same logic explains catastrophic failures across society. Why expert consensus often produces worse outcomes than common sense. Why credentials correlate inversely with original thought. Why the most educated institutions make the most devastating errors. Feynman saw this pattern everywhere he looked. From university physics departments that couldn't solve problems curious amateurs could handle, to government agencies that ignored obvious evidence because it contradicted official positions, to corporate research labs where credentialed scientists produced nothing while uncredentialed tinkerers invented the future. Same destruction, same replacement of thinking with performing, same optimization for credentials over competence. He documented a method that exposed these systems and rebuilt genuine understanding. Not learning faster, not memorizing better, reversing the specific brain damage education caused. The same technique that helped him rebuild physics from scratch. The same approach that let him humiliate NASA engineers who had decades more experience. The same logic that earned him a Nobel Prize while better credentialed physicists remained forgotten. That method wasn't complicated. It was just the opposite of everything schools taught.